as Iran has said the Strait of Hormuz is open to all commercial traffic for the duration of its ceasefire with the US. The truce is due to end on April 22nd. The strait has been effectively closed since Israel and the US launched their war on Iran on February 28th. About a fifth of the world's demand for oil and gas passed through the strait before the war. The price of a barrel of oil fell by 9% immediately after the strait's opening was announced. US President Donald Trump welcomed the announcement and said he believes a full deal to end the war will happen, quote, soon. But he also posted a message on Truth Social saying the US blockade of Iranian ships would remain in force for the moment. And just before the show, I spoke to Ambassador Barbara Leaf, a former US Assistant Secretary of State for Near Eastern Affairs, and now a diplomatic fellow at the Middle East Institute. I asked her about her reaction of these breaking news we are getting that the Strait of Hormuz is now apparently open.
Well, on the one hand, I want to say it's good news. I mean, anything that gets you towards something like the status quo ante, which was the strait being open to all commercial traffic, would be great. On the other hand, what I just saw was that President Trump, after reconfirming what the Iranian foreign minister announced, the president followed with, but we're still keeping a blockade on Iranian ports. So whether that was an agreement or whether that's just the way it's going to play, we'll see what the impact is. I'm holding my breath, of course, like everyone else.
I believe we all are right now. Markets have reacted already quite seriously. The oil price has come down by 9%. But that latest remark by Donald Trump that you referred to, could this basically mean that control of the strait is shifting to the US?
Well, that is what the Secretary of Defense has been asserting. But look, you know, control is achieved simply by a limpet mine on a ship or an underwater drone or an airborne drone by the Iranian side, which scares off maritime insurers, scares off ships. So control is a rather nebulous term at this point.
Does this, in your opinion, could this mark the beginning of the end of the war against Iran?
Oh, Gerhard, I'm never going to use that term until we see how talks resume and how they go, how long they go, what the space and time accorded them is. No, it's far too early to say this is the beginning of the end.
It's also too early probably to say whether it will be business as usual in the strait, will it?
That's right. And, you know, for the global economy, I think it's clear from all the heads of state, heads of government, from Asia, Europe, the region, really around the world, everybody but Russia and North Korea have said that the strait has to be open fully, as it was prior to February 28th or the week of February 28th. It can't be managed or controlled by any power, especially not Iran.
Now, but let's look ahead to a possible peace deal between the US and Iran. The opening of the strait, that's one major issue resolved, isn't it? What are going to be the other sticking points, the major points that could block a deal?
So again, Gerhard, I would say the strait is not resolved. If it's really open for the remainder of however long the ceasefire is, and I'm sure it will be extended so that talks can begin, it's not solved until it's solved. So let's park that for a moment. But of course, we've got the really critical issue, critical but not urgent, whereas Strait of Hormuz is both critical and is urgent. So going to the nuclear issue, there were reports today that, and of course they're not confirmed, that the administration was looking at a payment of some $20 billion of Iranian assets to the Iranians in trade for that highly enriched uranium. Folks have focused on the 440 kilograms of 60% highly enriched uranium, but there's also a large amount of uranium that is enriched to 20%. So there are many different pieces to the nuclear issue, and that is really going to take time and extended technical talks to resolve.
Do you think the Israeli government is happy with how events appear to be developing?
Well, for the moment, the Israeli government is far more focused on the theater nearest to Israel, which is, of course, Lebanon. And we had pretty significant developments in the last couple days. On Tuesday, you had the U.S. hosting the first direct Israel-Lebanon talks in decades, at the level of the Israeli ambassador to Washington, Lebanese ambassador to Washington. But then that kicked off a series of other diplomatic moves, with Secretary Rubio conferring by phone with Lebanese President Joseph Aoun, followed by a phone call between Aoun and President Trump, and then President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu, and then, ta-da, a 10-day ceasefire for Lebanon. Now, it's really important to understand that this is tied to the course of the talks with Iran, even though the U.S. has made very clear that it regards these as two very separate things. But it's clear that a continuation of the heavy-going Israeli operation in Lebanon could not just create friction, but actually disrupt the possibility of the U.S. and Iran actually sitting down and making headway. So it is and isn't related, but it is a significant get for all sides. And I emphasize all sides. The Lebanese were desperate to have a ceasefire. U.S. wanted to show that it could begin a separate diplomatic track that's quite important. Israel could say, well, we're going to have a ceasefire, but we're going to respond to any threats. So it's really going back to November 2024. And of course, the Iranians are claiming that it was all due to their pressure.
Now, let's point to one difficulty in this ceasefire. Hezbollah is the actor carrying out the fighting, but Lebanon is the signatory to the ceasefire. Can a ceasefire succeed when the party doing the fighting isn't the party at the table?
Well, yes and no. So now Hezbollah is most likely to abide by this. Why? Because Iran is claiming that this was at their insistence that Israeli operations stop. Now, as I said before, that doesn't remove Israeli troops from southern Lebanon. And there was the caveat to the ceasefire in the U.S. statement and Israeli statements that Israel could defend itself. So there is room for slippage, but for the moment, in terms of the wider effort to get the U.S. and Iran to round two of diplomatic negotiations, yeah, there will be pressure from Iran on Hezbollah to abide by the ceasefire. Once there is something achieved in the U.S.-Iran channel, then it gets a lot dicier. And the question always comes back to, how does the Lebanese state really impose itself on this powerful armed actor? But the fact that the Lebanese state is at the table, not Hezbollah, is a very significant achievement for the Lebanese.
Now, for more than a year, Hezbollah insisted it would not stop fighting until there was a ceasefire in Gaza as well. By agreeing to this deal now, have they effectively been forced to decouple from Hamas?
Yes, but that tie has never been very solid. And of course, once the Gaza war was officially over last October, yeah, there was no basis for Hezbollah to continue its operations. So these linkages have been attenuated. They have not been broken, but they've been attenuated. And of course, you saw Hezbollah, much against the will of the large majority of the Lebanese population, jump into the conflict between the U.S., Israel, and Iran within the first several days with a sort of a battery of 6 rocket fires. And boy, then, all bets were off. So the views on Hezbollah within the Lebanese public, including among the Shia community, are shifting away from from Hezbollah very decidedly, because this has been just an exhausting 3 years for the Lebanese people.
Thank you very much. The US diplomat Barbara Leaf from Washington there. French President Emmanuel Macron and the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer have welcomed the announcement by Iran and the US that the Strait of Hormuz is now open. Following an international conference in Paris, they said more than a dozen countries are ready to join a mission to restore the freedom of navigation through the straits. Macron said the opening of the waterway must be both lasting and a workable proposal. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz expressed his support for US involvement in the European mission. He said Germany could provide mine clearance and maritime intelligence capabilities. Now, my colleague Lisa Louis is in Paris at the Élysée Palace there where that meeting happened. First, how have leaders reacted there to the news that the Strait of Hormuz is now open?
Well, as you said, they welcomed that piece of news, but they were very cautious, really. Emmanuel Macron, the French leader, said it's obviously good news that there are ceasefires in Lebanon, also in Iran, and we've heard about the recent news today, but we remain cautious and we keep watching the situation. Just bear in mind that the ceasefire with Iran is set to run out next week, and the countries gathered here in Paris today and also via video link today were adamant that they would have to wait until the full end of the war before actually intervening.
Now, how does this opening of the strait affect the Europeans' plans?
Well, it does increase the pressure on them to come up with a real detailed plan. You know, as I said, they have been saying, you know, we will help secure the strait once peace is re-established. But actually to come up with a plan, they now need to talk about, you know, who will send, which country will send what kind of vessels, how will that work, how will they, provide insurance to merchant vessels that go through the Strait of Hormuz. To what extent will they work together? But they've been insisting that this will be a defensive mission and not a participation in the Iran war. They're really adamant that this is the case. And this is also why, as I said, they are waiting until peace is established. As I said, pressure is mounting on the countries to come up with a real planification of what is going to happen in the Strait of Hormuz.
You hinted on this. It is a defensive mission, or would be a defensive mission. What kind of mandate would it have?
Well, that's a very fair question. I think there's still some kind of discussion going on about that, also about the command structure that will be put in place. We heard Emmanuel Macron say today, this will be a completely independent mission with the countries involved here. We're not participating in the war. On the other hand, you heard the German leader, Friedrich Merz, say we would really wish that the USA will participate in this mission. So there seems to be some kind of divergence. France is really opposed to that idea that for example, the command structure is put under US military command. And there's still some discussion going on about that, how all this will be organized.
Now, we've heard earlier a tiny bit about what Germany's contribution could look like. Have you heard anything about that?
Absolutely. Friedrich Merz mentioned it when he spoke in front of the press. He said Germany will provide mine clearance vessels. That's really what most of the countries are likely to provide. They will provide maritime intelligence and mine clearance vessels. Mind you, military experts have been telling me before the conference started today, they've said, France is really is in the best space for that. They have more vessels than any of the other countries, including the UK. So it's likely that France will have some kind of leading role when it comes to that mission in the Strait of Hormuz.
Thank you very much there. Lisa Louis reporting from Paris.